And gentlemen, if we can make a start, it's gone 2 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody to this special meeting of Children and Young People Select Committee. And as usual, I wonder if we could just go around and introduce ourselves, bearing in mind that live streaming is on at the moment. So my name is Martin Grocott. I'm the member for the Lansdowne ward in Abergavenny, and I chair this committee.
Paula Harris, Scrutiny.
Ian Evans, Service Manager in Children's Services.
Claire Marchant, Chief Officer, Social Care and Health.
Jane Rogers, Head of Children's Services.
Maureen Powell, County Councillor for Castle Ward and Abergavenny and a member of Children and Young People Select Committee.
Tudor Thomas, County Thomas, County Councillor for Priory Ward, Abergavenny.
Good afternoon, David Jones, County Councillor for the Criconi Ward and member of the Children and Young People Committee.
Good afternoon, Joanne Watkins, County Councillor, Caldecott Castle Ward and member of the committee.
Good afternoon, Louise Brown, Shah Newton Ward, a member of this committee.
Good afternoon, Reverend Malcolm Lane, County Council for the Mardy Ward, member of this committee.
Afternoon, Sheila Woodhouse, Councillor for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny and member of this committee.
Good afternoon, County Councillor Roger Harris, observing this committee.
Good afternoon, Jane Pratt, Councillor for Llanelli Hill and Chair of Stronger Communities and observing this committee.
Thank you, everybody. Because
That's all right. Councillor Val Smith, Lambeth Ward, observing.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Okay, because this is a special meeting, there are no minutes to consider. That will come forward at our next regular meeting. So the first item is to consider if anyone needs to make any declaration of interest. Okay, moving on then. The first report is item 3, which is Safeguarding Training Strategy and the scrutiny of South East Wales Safeguarding Children's Board. Who's going to lead that one?
Chair, do you want me to introduce that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I? So members will be aware from reading the report that the purpose of bringing this to Select today is so that members can scrutinise the work of the South East Wales Regional Safeguarding Children Board and to scrutinise the alignment between the work of the Regional Board and our local work within Monmouthshire. Within the report, I set out some of the background to the Regional Safeguarding Children's Board and the 5 local authorities who are key partners, along with other statutory, third sector and voluntary organisations. The purpose of the board is to lead and coordinate and ensure the effectiveness of multi-agency safeguarding child practice across the region, both through its role in holding partner organisations to account and through its own programme of activity that it delivers through its partners and through the auspices of the South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board business unit. The vision of the board is that all children and young people in South East Wales are protected from abuse and neglect and live in safe home and communities and are supported to achieve their full potential. I've set out the strategic objectives for the board at 3.6 of the report, 4 main strategic objectives within a 3-year framework, as you can see. At 3.7, I've set out some of the links between the board and Monmouthshire, and that was covered also at Annex 2, where we tried to give a bit more of a representation visually of how Monmouthshire linked into the board from its kind of officer roles. At 3.10, there are some specific ways in which Monmouthshire plays through its activity at a local level within the framework of the regional board's activity. And I have with me here my good colleague Mel Roach, who is the coordinator and manager for the South East Wales Safeguarding Children Board. Chair, would it be helpful for if Mel has some things to say? Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Jane's asked me to come along today and have a chat with you about generally the work of the regional board, but more specifically how that links in to colleagues here in the Monmouth area. As she said in her report, it covers the 5 local authorities which we consider at the minute to be Gwent, and that's how it's set out in the documents that Welsh Government have given us in relation to regional safeguarding boards. Monmouth is obviously one of those local authorities that comprises our board. On thinking about how generally the board works, I thought it might be a good idea to give you a little bit, a very, very quick run through the work that sits perhaps beneath the level of that executive board, and just to give you a very quick pen picture of the type of activities that happen in our subgroups. So we have subgroups that cover a subgroup which is called Case Review Group, and that is a decision-making body that looks at whether we need to undertake child practice reviews, adult practice reviews, and more recently, domestic homicide reviews. So that is a kind of a decision-making group where we have healthy debates about, whether we meet the criteria, whether we need to undertake a review, and then recommendations are made back to our safeguarding board chairs and to the chair of public service boards in the case of domestic homicide reviews. So that's quite a busy agenda for that particular group. Monmouth have been very keen to work with us in the field of child practice reviews. And we have a number of members of the safeguarding team who've been trained to be either chairs of review panels or to be reviewers to undertake the review process on behalf of the regional board. So that's been a really successful piece of work that's happened with local colleagues. Our business planning group is the group that monitors the work of all the other subgroups, and it gives us a steer in relation to strategic plans, which is what Jane's referred to in her report around the strategic priorities, and also an annual report that comes out of the board to say, have we delivered on those objectives on an annual basis? We work quite closely with the National Independent Safeguarding Board to look at, how well we've done in delivering our objectives. And the business planning group is the group where all that kind of work gets put together. And what we try to do there is to turn kind of the business into practice. So that group sets the drive and the targets for all the other groups that sit underneath, where the actual work happens around training, engagement, a whole host of other things. We've got a quality assurance group, and we've worked very closely with colleagues in Monmouth around a quality assurance framework. In fact, Jane chairs that group on behalf of the board. So there's a strong connection around that, and we've done quite a bit of work outside of our quarterly meetings to make sure that we are looking at a proper, meaningful quality assurance framework which board members can look at and be assured that safeguarding it across the whole of Gwent is in a safe place, in effect. Another group that works underneath our business planning group is a group called Protocols and Procedures Group. The chair of that group is also a member of the safeguarding team here from Monmouth. And this group helps to embed the safeguarding work into frontline practitioners' day-to-day practice. They look at protocols and procedures that we might need to work on. They look at national priorities which might come our way as a safeguarding board, and they try to ensure that best practice from across the region is embedded into our policies and procedures that we work to. An example, just to give you a kind of solid example of some of that work, has been around what we've called a critical incident protocol, which was put together by our protocols group, which was agreed by our board, and that brings together on a multi-agency basis professionals from education, psychology services, the police, social services, in the instance of us having the death of a young person in our region. And that can be quite a critical time. It can be a critical time for practitioners. It can be a critical time for family members, for friends of that young person. And by coming together and sharing information, what we can actually do is put a support network around young people who may have been badly traumatised or affected by the death of one of their peers. So that's a piece of work which has kind of turned, protocols into practice, really, and gives you an idea of us evidencing some of the work around that. In relation to our engagement and communication group, we work very strongly with young children and young people in the region, and we try to get their views and get them to participate in the work of the board and tell us the direction of travel, really. So we try to make sure that we are well informed when we make strategic priorities and strategic direction. That group links into a number of other forums and makes sure that we raise awareness of some critical issues, things as wide-ranging as violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual violence, modern slavery, looking at child sexual exploitation, and making the links into all of those groups. And then the final group that we have that provides work that kind of that sits below the board is our Learning and Development Group, and that group manages a training programme and provides a range of safeguarding courses. In the last year, we've provided in excess of 1,600 training places for people around safeguarding training, and that's adding on to the training that the local authority already provides. It doesn't duplicate, it's kind of added value to the training that staff within Monmouth would get anyway. We also look to manage a website and an online booking system so that people have ease of access to book on to safeguarding board training programmes. You may be aware that we have what's called a local safeguarding network in the Monmouth area. We've got one in all of the 5 local authority areas, and we again try to bring messages from practice back to practitioners, tell them about any reviews that we've done, any learning that we've had as a response from those reviews, and bring them back to frontline staff to make sure it's embedded into practice. I think we promote good practice and messages that come out from those reviews, as well as the stuff that's not quite so palatable. We try to make sure that we balance that out for professionals. We operate a system within boards of hot topics. So we say to board members, if there are things which are critical or concerning in your areas, please can you bring those to the table for us? Please can you make sure that if your safeguarding arrangements within your own authority are reported into boards, inspections within local authorities are reported into boards, and that's part of our quality assurance framework going forward. I think that's a very whistle-stop tour, and I apologise for lots of information in a short time, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, members, who'd like to kick off? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. It's very interesting, and it was a good whistle-stop tour because it gave a lot of information. You were saying about the added-on training that over and above what we do in our authorities.
Yeah.
Are we notified of the dates and times of that regularly?
Yes.
Where would we pick up on that if we needed to? Within the calendar, or?
We've got a website which is specifically for the safeguarding boards.
Right.
So you can do a search and ask for Gwent Safeguarding, and our websites will pop up, and there's a booking system via the website.
Good. That was one thing I picked up on, and the other is you're saying about reporting things being reported into the boards. That's the boards within the area, and for the different authorities to report into those boards directly, is it? So.
It would be with what we do as a regional board is we ask board members every quarter, when you come along to a regional board meeting, if there are things which have been of concern, safeguarding concern, or critical issues in your own region, can you bring them to the board meeting and bring them up at that level? And that's a new format that we've tried to introduce to make sure that as a regional board, which, as Jane has said in her report, is responsible for monitoring safeguarding in all agencies, we ask board members to ensure that they let us know about any concerning issues in their region.
Yes, thank you very much. That sounds, if it can all be accumulated in together, how we can all learn from each other, and thank you very much.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got two questions, actually, if that's all right. The first question relates to 3.6 of the agenda, which talks about the boards for strategic priorities. One of those priorities, that's from 2016 to 2019, is improving our work with adolescents who exhibit risky behaviours. And I just wanted to ask to explain, if you've got any practical examples of how that improvement was being made, bearing in mind that the plan's been in since 2016. The second question was really to do with quality assurance and benchmarking, and how this relates between the different authorities, and how best practice is passed on from one authority to another. Thank you.
Okay, to pick up on your first point in relation to risky behaviour, you are right, the plan is a 3-year plan. We have an annual action plan which sits at the back of that 3-year plan. So we look at every year, we look at those kind of specific details under those priorities, if you like. And what we've done to date is spoken to children and young people about risky behaviours in adolescence, about the things that are important to them, about the things that, they think can be very risky and unsafe. And one of the things that came out on top of that list for us as a board was around online behaviours. So young people who get involved in sexting and sending photographs to peers and their friends without realising how risky that can be, for instance. Even young people who go online for gaming purposes, and there's a whole range of different ways that young people put themselves at risk online without realising. So as a consequence of that engagement with young people and the messages they gave us, we've introduced a training course about keeping young people safe online and through gaming sites, and we run that probably on a monthly basis throughout the whole of the Gwent region, with open access to anybody from any local authority area to come along. So that's one of the ways on a practical basis that we've spoken to young people and listened, what their risky behaviours might be and how we would address that. We also... Claire.
Sorry, Mel. And that just to add to what Mel has said then that aligns with our local engagement work and our local delivery work, particularly through Monmouthshire Youth Service and the integrated youth offer, where exactly the same priorities are understood, delivered through our engagement locally, and delivered through the programmes of the youth service. So you can see that alignment from the strategic priorities that are agreed at the board to our local priorities and what young people are telling us locally, and delivery programmes as well.
Another example for us, and very much so for Monmouthshire, is the development of the MACE meetings through the CS for child sexual exploitation, which has come about through the work of the board. MACE is multi-agency sexual exploitation multi-agency meetings. So these are meetings that are held on a regional basis. We tie in with Newport, so it's Newport and Monmouthshire piloting the MACE meetings for this area, where it's not about individual children so much as about trying to map perpetrator and victim activity across a region to see where any potential connections are, to see where links between groups of perpetrators, groups of vulnerable young people are, to share intelligence, to share practice around how you can interfere with perpetrator activity using some of the new police measures that are available and so forth. So it's lifting kind of individual child-focused practice into much more of a kind of a regional perspective to try and be tackling problem behaviours at that more regional strategic level. I don't know if you want to add anything about.
I guess the only thing that I perhaps would add is that one other area of work that we've looked at is substance misuse and young people's substance misuse, and we're doing a bit of almost fact-finding at the moment with our colleagues from Gwent Drug and Alcohol Service around the prevalence of young people's substance misuse, and then we'll do some work and try to link that work back in to if we have young people who have those kind of problems, are they involved in all sorts of other risky behaviours too? Child sexual exploitation being one of them. You know, are they subject to child protection concerns? There's a whole kind of, if we get one strand of information and work with one group of young people, that can lead us, you know, to help a whole range of others, and to look at preventative services across the board then for other young people.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watkins?
Thank you.
Councillor Brown, do you want to come
Sorry,
back on
yeah,
that? Sorry.
yes, thanks for that. I think it answered my first question, but the second question was still outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand that was your question about benchmarking and data and, yeah, the quality assurance framework. And I guess what we've tried to do around that work, there's an awful lot of information which local authorities have to produce in relation to children and young people, which goes into Welsh Government, which gets benchmarked, which gets published on an annual basis. And I think the work that we've been trying to do, and Jane may want to come in a little bit on this one as well, is to try and look at, are there things out there which are indicators to us that may be not around that more data information, not just around that how many children have we got on the child protection register, or, you know, how long were they on the register, or when did they come off, or what is their gender or their age. It's more about, are our services, our preventative services that we have in place, are they actually working? So, for instance, with our youth offending service, if we've got work going on with a large group of young people who maybe they're having work in preventative services, does that work? Does that then slow down the number of young people that actually go into the criminal justice system or go into custody? And we're doing some kind of unpicking around the data that we've got to try and give a fuller picture rather than just numbers or data.
Ms. Rogers, do you want to add anything to that?
I could.
Yeah, feel free.
I just wanted to, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, you're comparing through the board. We're comparing 5 authorities who have got quite different profiles. So sometimes it's kind of difficult to draw conclusions. But I think that some of the work we've done around comparing data around particularly neglect, which has been one of our key themes on the board going back some time, really led to some interesting kind of further kind of questions being asked, so that we, as the 5 authorities, we were comparing lengths of time on the register for children who'd been on the register for neglect, because that tended to be, for most authorities, the category of children who remained on the child protection register for the longest. We were kind of confirming that through our kind of comparison of data across the region. And we were able over time to kind of think about how, at a regional level, we might be able to tackle some of that. Following from that, we put in place our multi-agency supervision process, which in its first iteration brought together the core group membership of the particular child cases who were on for neglect to kind of meet outside of the family with the family's permission to kind of really review the child protection plan to see why that the case was still on at that second review, had remained on the register for a second review period. So it's just a really good, I think, example that kind of power of, working at that regional level, where you're really kind of challenging and asking each other kind of questions around, what is this data telling us at a regional level? How do we benchmark against each other, and what can we do to try and, help where there are kind of collective difficulties? And over time, I think across the region, we've seen a marked decrease in the length of children that time that children do spend on the register. Certainly in Monmouthshire, multi-agency supervision has been one of our kind of key areas where we've been able to see a direct kind of impact in making sure that those children's child protection plans are well managed.
Councillor Brown, my apologies for trying to stop you getting the answer to your second question. If I could now bring
don't worry, Chair, I didn't forget I'd asked 2 questions.
Thank you. Some of what I was going to ask has already been answered by your elaboration about young people. But firstly, I wanted to say, great, it's wonderful to see that you're actually directly engaging with young people and asking them what they regard as the greatest risks to themselves are. I was just wondering what routes you use to get that information from young people. So do you go through schools? Is it the youth service? How do you actually get the information from the young people?
Okay, there's a variety of ways, I guess, and we do use some of the existing groups and forums that are in place. So we can go, as you say, to schools, we can go to particular, youth forums, school councils. But when we talk to young people about risky behaviours, what we actually did was brought together from across the whole region. I think it was about 360 young people, with representation from every school, whether it was just 1 or 2 young people, and it was a particular age group. We kind of said, right, we're going to talk to year 8, and we're going to talk to them about kind of risky behaviours, what they see as risky, what keeps them safe. And we actually, did an engagement event. We involved local youth workers, so children were kind of came along with people they knew, and they had a day where we put on a day and we asked them specific questions through a variety of methods. They saw some media clips, they talked to us, they did a whole range of kind of workshop things, and that gave us quite a good steer really for where young people were. We also did last year we did a project which was a drama production which went into schools, and that was on child sexual exploitation, and it was a drama production which became a kind of interactive session where young people could offer solutions, and all it was a two-way process, and we've had really good feedback from that about working with young people and keeping them safe.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Councillor Thomas.
Thanks for this report. It is very enlightening. But one thing I'd like to ask, because obviously you've got 4 or 5 authorities working across, if there's something happening in Monmouthshire, it would be scrutinised obviously by the scrutiny committee. How does the group know that it's, in a sense, performing well? Is it sort of, as it were, by peer assessment from one authority to another, or is it generic? How do you know that you are progressing? I know it's a bit of an odd question, but
As part of our quality assurance framework that we've been working on, there's something, a part of that, which is called our Section 135, so it's 135 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and there's an audit process in there where, as a board, on an annual basis, we ask all constituent agencies, which would be each local authority plus police, probation, housing services, so it's a true multi-agency audit, and we ask each agency to go away and undertake that audit, and that audit is in relation to safeguarding, so it can be as broad as, how safe is your recruitment within your agency, have you got policies and procedures in place, do people know what to do if they have concerns, it kind of drills down to quite a detailed place, and that audit then is brought back to the board, the results are kind of collated, and constituent agencies would highlight where there are concerns.
I think that's a really good example of where that we really do kind of align across the piece, because our safes that we undertake in Monmouthshire, that gets right down into kind of service areas, really kind of align into what we now understand to be our Section 135. It used to be Section 28. But, so we're kind of drawing through our own analysis that goes into a lot more detail down to, right down to kind of service level areas, pulling that through so that when we're reporting back to the regional board, we've got a clear evidence trail of why we're saying what we say. And broadly speaking, the sections that are covered off within 135 are represented within our local safe audits.
Thank you. I wonder if I could just push you a little bit further on that one, because you've talked to us there about scrutiny by officers. We'll be considering later on this afternoon a corporate parenting document that emphasises to elected members their parenting role within the organisation. And as Councillor Thomas says, within this chamber we scrutinise our own senior members. Has any thought been given within the regional board about some way in which elected members can collectively across the 5 authorities exercise their corporate parenting in this particular way?
At the moment, I don't think that has happened, and I think that part of that is to do with the governance framework that surrounds safeguarding boards, and the legislation clearly says that the safeguarding board, which is the multi-agency partnership board, is the accountable body for safeguarding, and we report directly into Welsh Government. We have a very honest, critical friend in the National Independent Safeguarding Board, and a member from that national board comes to all of the regional board meetings and kind of gives us a steer really as a board where we're doing, in relation to kind of other boards across Wales. And there are only 6 boards now. All safeguarding boards are regional, so there are only 6 boards, but we report directly into Welsh Government, and I don't think the legislation kind of allowed or thought about elected member, representation or scrutiny.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to see this happening at regional level. You sort of answered part of my question there, because I'm just thinking about the other side of this now, expanding upon this and working with other boards within Wales and further afield than that. What sort of communication do you have with other types of authorities, how they handle these matters?
Okay, in relation to us as a regional board, we meet on a quarterly basis with all the other, or I meet on a quarterly basis with all the other business managers, so all the other people that do my kind of coordination role around boards, and we also meet on a quarterly basis with Welsh Government. So we have that kind of direct line really to the people that we report into. In relation to the national board, they have each member of that national board is a link person for one or two board regions. So we have a link person who also links in with Cumtaff, which is RCT in Merthyr, and then there's another person who is the link person for Cardiff and the Vale, and they all come together as a national board, so they all are able to kind of see where people are and how work is going along. In addition to that, we are just about to embark on some work around our protocols and procedures, so the stuff where we turn business into practice, and we're looking to kind of do a bit of expansion work and see whether we can do that on an all Wales basis.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think just one final thing from me, if I may. I guess that one of the aims of the board will be to introduce some commonality of practice across the region to ensure that people can't slip through the net or whatever. I suppose there's a parallel between the work of the board and the work of the EAS, the Education and Advisory Board across South East Wales. And I think within that organisation, Monmouthshire in many ways looks very different from the other authorities that are part of that organisation. And I was just wondering if in terms of safeguarding, Monmouthshire again appears different to the other authorities that make up the board, or are the problems common across?
From my perspective, I work with 5 different local authorities, and each has its own characteristics. There are some commonalities, but I think probably, if I were being completely honest, one of the major difficulties of my role is trying to coordinate the work of 5 different local authorities who do things differently, who have different priorities, who have different concerns, So I don't think that from the safeguarding board perspective, we wouldn't be in a position to kind of say Monmouth is very different. There may be different, geographical situation where it's a large area, it's a smaller population. Okay, so Newport is actually considerably different in relation to safeguarding concerns to Blaenau Gwent. So each local authority has its own characteristics. We don't try to say to everyone, this is how you must do it, because at the minute, everyone has their own identities and wants to keep it that way. So, as I say, if I was being honest, perhaps my challenge is working with 5 directors of social services.
I should imagine they are not the easiest people to work with. Could I thank you very much indeed for coming along to talk to us about this report this afternoon. Members, we have recommendations there at point 2. Are we happy to accept those recommendations? Yep, thank you very much indeed. Okay, and thank you very much indeed for your time. I wonder if we could now move on to the report around placements. Because the other report came in a bit late, so if we could move straight on to the placements report and then the corporate parenting after that, if that suits. So who's going to lead us through on that one?
Chair, if I may, I'll just give a brief introduction, and then of 2 colleagues to my right, Rhian Evans and Craig Williams, who've already introduced themselves, who will give you a little bit more around the detail. The purpose of bringing this children's placements report here this afternoon is that we are asking scrutiny really to monitor and scrutinise our performance in this area. It's obviously a critical area for us around a relatively small number but highly vulnerable number of our children and young people here in Monmouthshire. And we had agreed with internal audit, indeed asked internal audit to do the piece of work back in their 2016-17 audit work programme to look at how we make placements for children and young people from a children's social services point of view. The reason we'd identified it as a risk area is because there'd been really a lack of commissioning capacity within children's social services probably for about 10 years in this council, and that meant that I think probably for me coming in as a new back then director of social services from an adult services background, where I was used to working with quite a robust and structured commissioning arrangement, there were some risks around that we needed to make sure that we fully understood and we had plans to address. The internal audit work, as you can see, was done some time ago, and obviously what we've been working throughout that time and right up to date now is to make sure that we've got the right arrangements in place at a number of levels, really. Most importantly of all, that the placements that we make are safe, that they are placements which have got the right skills and capacity and capabilities to meet the needs of the children and young people who are being placed within them. That goes back to the quality of the social work practice and the assessments that are undertaken by those children, by their social workers, often in partnership with health, because a number of these young people would have health elements into their care and support plans as well. That in making those placements and making sure that they're safe and that the outcomes for the children and young people are properly identified, and that we're monitoring from a social work and care and support perspective against those outcomes, that we're also ensuring that we're getting value for money from those placements. And that's a challenge in itself, as you will be aware from some of the budget monitoring that you do, because of the paucity really of the market around children's services placements within the region, within Wales, indeed within, right across the UK. And there's been sort of media coverage around some of that at a UK level, but it's a particular issue for us in South Wales around that. And in terms of making sure that our arrangements are both effective from the children's and young person's point of view, most importantly, but from an organisational point of view, robust, there's a number of different elements that need to be in place, right through from the care planning and assessment, through to the finding of the placement, the securing of that placement. And what you will see reference to is the 4 Cs, which is a commissioning arrangement across South Wales, which works with authorities to accredit, to secure, to commission placements on behalf of authorities, and then a smaller number of placements come outside that framework contract with the 4 Cs, and that's where our own commissioning arrangements locally need to be effective. So obviously the internal audit report could give only limited assurance based on the evidence reviewed at the time. And as part of our Children's Services Improvement Programme, we've obviously had a very focused programme approach, which has been scrutinised before, right through from commissioning, right through from practice and assessment, through to commissioning, and trying to grow that provider market as well. So if I just conclude there in terms of introductory remarks, and I'll ask Rian, who's the lead service manager in Children's Services, and Craig, who thankfully we now have commissioning capacity, have been sort of critical in taking forward the recommendations from the audit report.
I was going to ask Craig to start this, because the contracting and commissioning element sort of structures the work within social care, so it might make more sense if we start with your...
Yeah, no problem. Good afternoon, members. Again, my name is Craig Williams. I'm the lead commissioner for Children's Services, and I sit within the commissioning team. The lead commissioner for Children's Services is a new post. I was only employed on a permanent basis from September of last year. Prior to that, I was employed on a temporary basis within Monmouthshire. As it was identified early in 2016, there was a gap in Children's Services commissioning. Therefore, hence why I'm here this afternoon. The first point on the audit report was accreditation, particularly accreditation of off-framework providers was identified as an issue. The audit comment was the accreditation process for dealing with off-framework providers was not yet fully developed, and some key checks were not evident at time of review. If I can just provide you with an update, accreditation was previously undertaken by the Placement and Support Team, which sat within Children's Services, but recently the accreditation process is transferred now and is being managed within the commissioning team. The key parts of the accreditation process include checking and reviewing most recent regulatory reports, gathering references from host authorities. If this is not sufficient, or they do not place at a provider, we should seek alternative professional references from placing authorities wherever possible. We also carry out credit and financial checks. We may also ask audited accounts and business plans from providers as well. Organisations are asked to complete an application form, which includes information on insurance, finances, registration, legality, internal quality assurance processes, amongst other things. In addition, providers are also asked to provide a statement of purpose and their business plan, staffing structures and training strategy and a plan. Latest internal quality assurance reports and insurance certificates. If needed, we will request additional information, carry out a visit or request more references if there are gaps in information. If we have any concerns or where there is a new company. A decision is then made as to whether to progress to accreditation. So you can see there's quite a robust process put in place to actually accredit the provider to make sure that they got all the checks in place before we actually place any young people with them. Sometimes there is a need for emergency placement. Where an emergency placement is required, we will carry out at least 3 checks: the regulatory report, references from host authority and finance checks before any individual moves into that placement. Expect in exceptional circumstances where immediate transfer is required. A risk-based decision can then be made as to whether it is safe and suitable for the young person to move into that placement. So you can see that we do have quite robust checks in place for children and young people moving into any residential placement, but also, as I said, sometimes it's an emergency nature of that, so we do take a risk-based approach to that as well before we actually place any young people into a placement. So that was action plan number 1. I'll pass you over to Ria now, I think is going to go through number 2.
Okay, what I was going to do is just outline how the social care aspect of this marries with the commissioning and contracting in broad themes, and then I can answer the individual points during questions, if that's useful. So from a social care point of view, what we needed to make sure was that we were clear about the processes, the systems, even down to the forms in terms of how our staff on the ground and then up through the ranks were interfacing with commissioning and contracting to make sure that it was secure and robust. Underpinning that, Claire's already touched on what we need is good practice, good risk analysis, and ideally, ultimately, outcome-focused plans, which are very clear and measurable, because in an ideal world, we'll move towards outcome-focused commissioning, which then makes it easier to monitor whether our providers are responding to the needs of our young people and therefore hold them to account. What will come from that then is looking at what exists on the outside in terms of marketing and what we need in terms of Monmouthshire response to our needs on a sort of a wider theme basis. The majority of that work will be captured in item 9, I think, if you look at the audit report, which talks about really, are we compliant with what we need to be doing? And when we unpick that, that's about social work practice. The other aspects of the social care pieces of work that the placement and contracting officer who sits within the fostering team was tasked to do as part of this audit. There are quite a few single action items in the audit report. One of those is, for example, making the Excel spreadsheet where she has relevant information only accessible to relevant people in the organisation. And we can talk through them in detail if you want. And then the other critical bit of it was the role of the placement officer herself, because she straddles, or the role straddles, both worlds. And that goes back to making sure that there's a clarity around what she needs to do to make those systems and processes efficient, and that there's an understanding between the both departments within Monmouthshire Local Authority. One of the last points on the audit plan I've got in front of me here, which I think is included in the copy that you've got, is about how then the work aligns with multi-agency commissioning arrangements, so how we work with colleagues in health and education, both locally within Monmouth and then actually regionally within the wider Gwent footprint. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think obviously I touched on the accreditation process on action plan point number 1. If I can move on to quality assurance, which is very, very important, which is action point number 3. We are committed to monitoring all in-county placements of residential and supported housing, where we currently have placements, ensuring the delivery of high quality services that meets the needs and promote the well-being of people using them. All the providers have a named monitoring officer. All in-county providers receive an annual monitoring visit, and where they are delivering a high percentage of commission services, 2 relationship visits as well. Additional visits can be expected where time-sensitive recommendations are identified during standard monitoring or where serious concerns are raised via families, social workers, safeguarding and CSSW or our partner agencies. The monitoring officer will consider all aspects of the service, and visits are tailored to that specific service and are built around recent feedback from the social workers. So we work very closely with the social workers who visit the young person quite regularly, individuals and other professionals. Annual monitoring will usually include safer recruitment practices, a review of policies and procedures, staffing levels, staff and service user experience, individual file audits, provision of meaningful activities and the environment. So it's quite all-encompassing when the monitoring officer goes in, and they spend the whole day within the unit as well, and may spend a number of days in there as well if they find things. For out-of-county providers, we do not automatically carry out monitoring visits. However, we are committed to monitoring needs based on a risk assessment. This is based on the fact that most of out-of-county placements will be monitored sufficiently and appropriately by their host authorities, and that individual progress against care plan will be monitored and reviewed with a social worker. So we do keep in contact with the host authorities and with the social workers quite regularly on this as well. We carry out regular, at least every 6 months, a desk-based monitoring of all out-of-county placements, and a decision is made as to the need for additional or in-person monitoring based on the outcome of the most recent regulatory report, feedback from the host authority, and feedback from the social worker with regard to the most recent child young person review. We'll always make contact with the social worker before the visit as well, to gather feedback and also establish feasibility and suitability of speaking to the young person as well. This isn't always possible if it will unsettle or disrupt the young person at the placement. Feedback is given to the provider during the visit, and report is written and shared with the provider and relevant social worker after the visit. This will include observations, agreed good practice and recommendations for improvement. What happens if there are concerns? If recommendations are identified during the monitoring visit, they will be fed back to the provider during the visit. Providers will be asked to respond and to rectify lower risk recommendations as soon as possible, and a decision will be taken as to when to follow up. For medium higher risk concerns, a provider will be asked to produce an action plan as to how they will plan to rectify the issues in a timely manner to ensure they own the issues and required actions. This will be monitored alongside the provider at reasonable intervals. Normally, it depends on how risky the situation is. It could be within a day, it could be within a week, it could be a month. So we set appropriate timescales for the provider to respond to the things that we actually find at the placement. Where a service fails to respond appropriately to recommendations and decisions taken to proceed, we decide to take them to a formal process through our escalating concerns critical failure process. We do link in at this stage with the 4Cs, as Claire mentioned earlier, the Children's Commissioning Consortium Cymru, which are the holders of the framework providers. So some of the concerns may be for framework providers, but they may not be on the framework. So there may be other providers that are off framework, so we take responsibility for them ourselves. For off-work providers, 4Cs will still be notified, but concerns will be managed by ourselves, involving colleagues in other placing authorities and regulatory bodies as needed. And then safeguarding notifications will be processed as required as well. I don't know if you want me to go through the other audit action plans. Well, there's a number of other action plan numbers against the commissioning unit. One is with regard to the contract procedural rules, The other is regarding costing information, which there's a lot of work going on that at the moment to actually address the costs of residential placements prior to them going into placement, a thorough costing. And the last one is in relation to having a copy of the service level agreement with the 4Cs, and actually how do we scrutinise the 4Cs for their work as well. But I'm happy to take any questions you may wish with regard to the commissioning element of the internal audit plan.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, any questions? Councillor Thomas.
Can I just clarify that I heard it correctly, that if there's a placement, as it were, out of county, there isn't an actual visit there, you're reliant on, as it were, the professional monitoring by that host authority of the placement to say that, yes, it's satisfactory. And you're not actually visiting there, because I was slightly sort of surprised at that in one way, because, you know, the ones that within county, closer to home, you are physically going in there. I've not been involved with child protection in that sense, but to me sometimes actually a visit is where you really pick up on things by physically going in there and, you know, sniffing the air really and thinking, well, is this okay or is it not? Are you relying on the host authority to do that for you?
From a social work perspective, the visits will be made. So in terms of safeguarding and understanding where the child is in relation to their journey against their action plan, then we have sites. I think what Craig was talking about was from a contract and monitoring perspective. So if you think of the business in terms of a placement having two elements, so you've obviously got the child or the young person who's in situation there, but then you've got the actual if you like, housekeeping around that. So what's the environment like? What's the, I don't know, what's the arrangements for staffing and things like that. So that, I don't know if you want to add detail around that element, if that's what you were interested in.
Do you want me to just pick it up, Rian, if that's all right? I mean, one of the things that we did when Craig first started with us actually was to go out and monitor every out-of-county placement as part of a case review, picking up on the fact that they hadn't been monitored for some time. And that was the social worker and Craig together to go out and do that piece of work. Because, as you say, Councillor, it's going in there, you know, the feel of the place, looking at the staffing rotas, you know, looking at, you know, almost just the environment and the atmosphere within which the placement is made. Now, we are reliant on the social workers as part of their regular visits, and in children's services, it's quite different from adults, where there might only be one visit a year out to review a placement. In children's services, obviously, we work to statutory review timescale, so there's frequent visits from those social workers. And if there were any issues there which required a contract monitoring visit, or if a regulatory report came through from CQC, as it's likely that a number of these placements would be across the border, or CIW, as they now are in Wales, which gave any cause for concern or any conversation with the host authority, then we would include contract monitoring routinely in that visit. But because the social workers are there so regularly at the statutory intervals, there's somebody in there who's the eyes and ears, not just in terms of the outcomes and the well-being of the young person, but looking at the placement generally, and we'll supplement that with commissioning expertise if we have a risk-based approach to needing to do that.
Okay.
Reassured by that does clarify it really, because obviously it is such an important area. I am reassured by that, and that a social worker, you know, physically goes there, because there's nothing like actually going into a place. And you know, my experience is more with school, but if you walk into a school, you do pick up on, you've got some idea what it's like when you go in there, from the atmosphere, etc. And I think that's important, so I'm very reassured by that.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. My question really related to the comparison with looking at, obviously this one is looking at monitoring externally commissioned placements, but also I was interested in how you monitored in comparison the internal fostering arrangements that are with Monmouthshire, you know, and how the sort of standards that you were applying in relation to the commissioning side were also being applied internally to check on foster care within Monmouthshire as well. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It's actually in process, very similar. It's just through a different mechanism. So with our foster carers within Monmouthshire come under our fostering regulations, and they're each allocated a supervising social worker. So there's that same dual process going along. The child has his or her own allocated social worker, and the foster carer under fostering regs has also their own allocated social worker. And the role of the social worker that's allocated to the foster carer is to provide supervision and support for the carer. It's as a general rule of thumb, they're in the placement on about a monthly basis. They're reviewing the fostering element of that placement, so their focus is very much the foster carer, not the child, although obviously the two interface quite significantly. They're looking at the records the foster carer keeps. They're looking at the physical environment of the foster carer's home, any health and safety issues, any emotional, psychological support that the foster carer might need. They're looking at the own developmental plan of the foster carer. What training have they done? What specific training might they need in relation to a particular placement that they have? And then for the foster carer then has a annual review. I'd need to check that. They have their annual review where the foster carer is presented back to the fostering panel to check that they're still suitable and appropriate carers. And what is presented as part of that review, it's very similar actually to what Craig has described in what's presented in a kind of contract monitoring. So you'd have feedback from the child, feedback from children in placement, feedback from social workers of children, and then the overall report of the supervising social worker would be presenting a report on that foster carer back to panel. So it's that same kind of rigour of checks and balances that go into our own internal foster carers as you would as goes into external. It's just slightly different mechanisms.
Any other questions? Councillor Pratt.
It's just some advice, really. I was unable to open the appendices. Was there a particular reason for that were attached to this paper?
Yeah, I think we all found that problem, in fact, and we've been able to run off some hard copies today for members to see, but it was a difficulty, and it was something I intended to raise with officers at the end of the meeting. I wonder if I could just make a comment by way of eliciting a response. I think this is a nice example of the way in which our internal audit people and social service officers work together hand in glove. I should imagine that when this report landed on your doorstep, Ms. Marchant, it couldn't have been that pleasant to read because there's rather more red than green in it. And it's good to see the steps that have been taken to move things forward. I was just wondering, and it may be hypothetical, and if it is, please tell me, but without this audit report, did you commission it, or did they ask if they could do it, and would it have led to the changes that we have seen had it not been produced?
I think that's a really good question. I've always made friends with auditors. I think I think it's a really the insight that an independent audit can bring to your service is invaluable for a chief officer for a director of social services, or indeed any chief officer. And the reason that we'd agreed this, and I'll use the word agreed as part of the internal audit programme, was because we'd recognised, and you know, that you've got to understand your own risks, that there were some risks in this area, and we needed to make sure that we understood fully, and audit have that time, because it's their day job, isn't it, to go in and really to follow things through in depth, exactly what needed to be done to make sure that we were managing those risks. We were already, having come in as I suppose Craig said in his introductory remarks, because there'd been that gap around commissioning capacity particularly, we were keen to fill that for as quickly as we could, so that we were making sure that we worked on this. And, you know, as I alluded to in one of my previous answers, one of the first things that Craig did when he started here back almost 18 months ago, before having a little gap to go to the NHS, but we got him back, was to go out and to monitor all of those high-cost placements, those out-of-county placements, because that was a really critical piece of work for us. At the same time, Jane was and is leading the Children's Services Improvement Programme. So, you know, the interlink between this report and that practice to improvement, practice to commissioning approach within that Children's Services Improvement Programme is really clear. And what's going to be incredibly helpful to us is internal audit going back in, as they will, because it's an area that they could give only limited assurance at the time, and to review again with an independent eye and give us that independent scrutiny, if I use that word, of how much progress that we've made in these key areas.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harris, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's just basically to declare a personal interest in that I'm the authorities member on the fostering panel, and just to confirm what Jane was saying about the rigours that the foster carers go through on the annual reports, which are quite detailed. So anyway, declaring a personal, I don't think it's prejudicial interest.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Just before we leave this one, Miss Marchand, several times you've brought to this committee proposals for trying to increase our own Monmouthshire foster parent placements, and for bringing people who are currently placed out of county back into the county. I wonder if you could just tell us the most recent picture there. How's it looking now?
Rian had sent me an email earlier this week to give me the absolute up-to-date position, so I noticed that Rian is searching for it. Yeah, if you just bear with us for a moment, then we'll get the accurate answer for you.
Yeah, excuse me, it was yesterday afternoon, so I'm literally just going through that.
I think just while Rian is finding it, finding that accurate response, I mean, one of the things which underpins all of this is some work which we're doing both locally and regionally, just to increase the capacity, foster carers, the right type of residential placement, the right models of residential placements, because when Craig referred to emergency placements being made, it's a very real position for us. You know, very, very small number of children, but, you know, the right type of placements. And, you know, for most of our looked after children, a in-house Monmouthshire foster carer is the preferred option in terms of that. So increasing that number is a priority, and Rian will tell you the exact figure.
I will. Sorry, I'm scrabbling around for the up-to-date position. So let me just check that it's on the end of this one here. Yes, great, okay. So we've got, basically we've got an update from our foster team manager in terms of position as at yesterday. We have a total of, so if I give you the total first and then I break it down into different types, we will have recruited 30 foster care households and placed 24 children this financial year to date. And the last time we used an external placement, just as a matter of interest, with that was 28th of September 2017, so that's good, 3-4 months ago. In terms of the breakdown or how that looks, we've currently got 5, I'm just going back up here, 5 potential new foster carers currently in the assessment process from a recent event that we did just before Christmas. And we're predicting that they will be approved by March the 31st. That's roughly a third of people that we met in that event who are coming through into our process, and hopefully we'll complete that. And just, again, from a statistical point of view, the National Foster Agency says that it's usually 1 in 10 conversions from interest to actual finalisation. So we're currently over target if we keep going at this rate. I'm just looking if there's any more information for you here. And that's all around the campaigns. And then... No, sorry, that's all the stats I've got today. Is there anything that I haven't answered that you want to ask again? I can just check.
I think, considering you weren't expecting that question, that was a very detailed response. So thank you very much indeed. That was my attempt at a left field question there, and thank you very much for your response. We have the recommendation there, members. Are we happy to accept it? Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for bringing that report to us. Moving on then to the remaining agenda item, which is the corporate parenting strategy. Perhaps I could say that you will have seen in the document the forward there by our cabinet member. Councillor Jones did offer to come along this afternoon. My view was that it was more a discussion we would want with officers. But if we do require Councillor Jones to come, she's in the building and more than happy to come. And if I could say from the chair, I think that reflects our very positive relationship that we have with our cabinet members, both for safeguarding and also for education. So if we do need our cabinet member, she's available. But moving on then, corporate parenting.
Chair, could I just inquire if people have had difficulties in opening the attachment, because the main purpose of bringing the report would have been the early scrutiny as we develop the strategy and action plan going forward, if people haven't been able to...
Yeah, thanks, Ms Rogers. There it is. The problem was with the original report that we had. This one, if you remember, came along a bit later. So the problem was with the thumbnails in the first two reports. But we have all got the actual strategy document here. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So the reason for bringing this report today is very much on behalf of the corporate parenting panel, so that select members can be involved in some of the initial consultation around how we develop our corporate parenting strategy for the authority, the council, going forward. This is the second iteration of a corporate parenting strategy and action plan. And it would run from, our intention is for it to run from kind of April 2018 to March 2021. The report is brief in the sense that the main body of what we need to be scrutinised is within the draft strategy and action plan, but it just makes the point that to having that kind of corporate parenting approach is part of our legislative framework within the Social Services Wellbeing Act 2014, which stresses that it is a whole council responsibility to take to be aware of and take care of the children and young people within our looked after system and our care leavers. We want this to be the development of this strategy to be developed through a process of consultation. This is our initial stab at it, but we also want to have input directly from some of our young people through our young people's participation group, through and with foster carers, and also with our operational teams, and of course our senior leadership team. If I then take us on to the body of the report itself, the actual strategy itself, I'm just going to highlight some of the key developments and differences that we've been working on from the original corporate parenting strategy, which took us through to 17. So obviously the foreword by Councillor Penny Jones there, who's the chair of the corporate parenting panel. With the priority areas, we've kept the first 1 to 7 priority areas the same between the old strategy and this new one. However, we've added 2 priority areas that we felt as a new panel coming together were priorities for us in Monmouthshire. That's priority 8, very similar to what we've just been discussing. Well, exactly the same as what we've been just discussing, that looked after children are cared for by Monmouthshire carers and remain close to their homes and communities. And the second priority that we've added there is to make sure that all care leavers are supported in education, training and employment, as we know that's been something that we want to take forward. So that's the main differences there. In the next page of the report, we've now linked our corporate parenting strategy much more explicitly to our Where I Am Safe document, which is our kind of overall LAC and commissioning strategy for children's services within Monmouthshire that was approved by Council going back in July 16. So really that being the point that, you know, wherever possible, our aim within Monmouthshire is to keep children safely within their own families. But then if we're not able to do that, then we want to ensure that where children are looked after, they have the best possible experience and go on. That stands them in good stead to make that kind of really difficult transition into adulthood. And we were hearing in our whole, just as an aside, we were hearing in our whole authority safeguarding group this morning through the Engage group that the Young People's Forum within Monmouthshire, it's not specifically for looked after children, but Will, our Chief Officer for Education, was saying how hard it is young people who are going off to Oxford and Cambridge, how much they're daunted by, you know, that transition into adulthood and what is this all going to mean for them. And we were then thinking through how much harder it is for children who've had those disrupted experiences. You know, so we're wanting this strategy to really get behind that kind of care leaver experience, you know, because it's so much harder for those children. So sorry, just a bit of an aside. Just thought about it. So lost my train of thought, obviously. So yeah, so we've also had to kind of update the strategy to make sure that it is fully aligned with the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014. So where we had the kind of core aims within the old legislation, we've now got the outcomes that are defined through the Social Services Wellbeing Act as what we would be aspiring, how we would be defining good outcomes for care leavers and looked after children. Key difference. What is corporate parenting remains very similar to the old strategy to the new. There's no significant fundamental change to what we would understand by the term corporate parenting and what we would expect of corporate parents. The next page there, we've got a whole section added now to the new strategy which talks much more about care leavers. The old strategy was fairly slim on care leavers, so we've tried to strengthen that bit and have drawn out 2 particular pieces of work that have helped us do that. One was the report that was led by the Children's Commissioner, Hidden Ambitions, which talked still about the challenges that are faced by care leavers around their transitions. And then at a more regional level, we undertook a review through, an independent review through IPC, Institute of Public Care, which looked at our most complex care leavers within the region and their options around support and accommodation needs, really kind of highlighting again that there are difficulties still around for care leavers accessing what is suitable and good support and accommodation options, and thinking about what we can do at a regional level to address that. So just strengthening the bit on care leavers in terms of the strategy. Then it's taking you through what the kind of national picture, but really trying to get the kind of regional I should say, the local picture in that. Still a little bit of work to do around kind of making sure that that data, when we issue the strategy, is the most up-to-date data that we've got, but that gives you a general kind of sense of where we're going. Obviously, we've got to, reference this is in the context of rising looked after children numbers, but trying to give a bit more of a profile of just the kind of legal status of those children. One of our particular increasing areas within Monmouthshire, as a result of kind of a lot of different strands really, is that we now have many more children looked after within that looked after system within Monmouthshire, but actually placed with their parents, which bring a particular to practice issues that we need to kind of bear in mind, and similar for looked after children who are living within kinship arrangements. A little bit of a breakdown of age, but also we've looked in terms of our breakdown of foster or care arrangement type, which so much ties in with our desire to increase our own Monmouthshire carers and move away from our reliance on independent fostering agencies and indeed residential, so tying into that kind of priority area 8, giving a bit of background to that. The following section of the report really gives a bit of an overview of what we felt were our key achievements within the strategy under 2014-2017 strategy, some key achievements as well as some of the barriers and challenges that we faced, and beginning to kind of think through some of what that kind of changing context was and how that impacted on our ability to achieve or respond to the issues for looked after children and care leavers within that 3-year period. 3 years in some respects seems such a small amount of time, but in other ways, things change all the time. We've had some new legislation come in that period. Our profile of looked after children within Monmouthshire has changed quite significantly over that period, and it's trying to kind of think that through now into the next 3 years. We've talked within the final little bit of the main body of the report talks about how we would be aspiring to kind of monitor and evaluate the strategy, and within then the action plans as they've set forward, we've made a change there in that final column. In the actual action plan, we've tried to present some data around how the success or otherwise of the strategy going forward might be evaluated. Of course, that would sit alongside narrative, but trying to just pin some data measures down around how we would measure the impact of our strategy. So that, Chair, in its early stages is how we are developing our strategy. There, I'm sure there will be questions and suggestions to move forward. So
thank you very much, and congratulations on bringing into that final column there ways in which your success can be measured, because without that it makes the scrutiny so much more difficult. Members, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. With the children that you're managing to stay with their own families, are you finding different types of problems, or is it similar to when they are out of the county? Because it sounds so much better to me, but then there may be other problems which we wouldn't think about.
And that's a very, very pertinent question. It does require a slightly different approach sometimes to the practice that you use to support both those children and the families who are caring for them, because a lot of the kind of those family dynamics come into play a lot differently. So you may be having a grandparent caring for a grandchild where you've got the natural parent in there as well. So it can sometimes it just presents, sometimes the cases themselves present with different issues and challenges. And also you're kind of working with a family member who may not it wasn't their career path to become a foster carer, but suddenly find themselves in a position where they are caring for a child, and rightly so. We were always going to look for family solutions as our first option where that's safe, but that it's developing a relationship with that carer who'd never anticipated possibly, but that they were going to be in this role, working with a local authority, attending foster care reviews, when they're just gran. So there's lots of different dynamics to bring in with that, and certainly an area that our social workers are kind of quite interested in. We've got our base provision, which works equally with kinship carers as it does with generic foster carers, and in fact actually find themselves working more with kinship carers than they do because of those very issues.
I know it's not quite the same thing, but back earlier in the year I was with a group of youngsters who are carers in a different way. They're looking after mother and father, or looking after a disabled sister or brother. And it was very interesting talking to those children.
Microphone.
Oh, tis on. Tis on. Those children were, they'd grown up quite quickly to do that, but it was very admirable to see how they had adjusted their lives and their careers into it. And I suppose this must be the same thing with them, as you say, with being cared by somebody else within the family tree, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pound. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on from the last question, just like to know really if the fostering that takes place within the family is almost a forced decision because of a lack of other placement. Is there an element of that, or is it purely a calculated decision that there is the skill within the family to foster the child or look after the child?
It's always our first, when we know a child might be needing to be looked after, it's always our first line, our first people that we go with is family members. So it rarely happens. Well, it would never happen that way round. So it would always be family would be our first choice. If they're safe and suitable and appropriate to care for that child, that's where we'll look. It would never kind of come from the other direction.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. I was looking at the breakdown by age, and it mentioned that between April and September 2017 there were 18, 16 to 17-year-olds. Is there an age cut-off point, or what happens to children who are a bit older than that in terms of further education and so forth?
I've just lost my place in terms of the breakdown, but I'm understanding that the point of the question is that what happens to 18-year-olds, is that correct? Yeah. So they're no longer a statutory looked after child once they turn 18, but they do come under care leaver legislation. So we have a duty to ensure that they are suitably housed and supported right through to 21 or 24 if they're in full-time education. So there's various options. There's supported lodgings. We can find them independent housing solutions, but make sure that they've got support in there. Or there is also kind of when I'm ready placements. We don't have many of them in Monmouthshire currently. That's transferring a foster placement to extend it for that kind of 18-year-old. So there are options, and we have a responsibility towards them until they are 21, and that responsibility extends across all those outcomes that are talked about in the strategy, so that they have somewhere safe to live, that they're supported in their education, employment ambitions, that they have good relationships, that they participate. We have that responsibility to our looked after children until they're kind of, into their early adulthood.
Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. As a new councillor, I was going to ask you to summarise the difference between the old strategy and the new one, but you've done an excellent job of that, so thank you for that. But my question is, we talk about placements out of county. People moving into, the numbers have risen up so much. Is this because people, as you pointed out, a lot are placed with parents? Is it people moving into county having any sort of effect on the increase in numbers? Is there any way of measuring that?
If I understand the question correctly, no. If we have a care order on a child, so if we have shared parental responsibility for a child through a court process, and that child is placed in Ireland or Scotland, anywhere in the, anywhere, we're still responsible for that child. So we'd still go off and do the stat visits, whether they're in Torvine or, the Outer Hebrides. It would still be our child. And that's the same for children who are coming into Monmouthshire. We don't pick them up. The responsibility for that child stays very much with the placing authority. Yeah.
Okay, is that Councillor Watkins?
It's just really to say that we've already seen this strategy in the corporate parenting panel, and so Tudor and myself have already given our feedback into that panel, and it's nice to see some of the things reflected in the draft. So the draft is already moving on, which is really great to see. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thomas.
I know I've raised this before, and obviously other people have raised it, but I still feel some sadness when you read the line where it says the outcomes for children and young people in care remain poor, with research indicating this group's overrepresented in homeless and prison population, etc., plus educational achievement. And the school that I went to, which was bilingual, the motto was Goref arf ddysg, which meant which means the best weapon is the weapon of learning. And I know incredible efforts are made, but is there anything more we can do to sort of mentor these children, to encourage them, in terms of educational achievement, in terms of work or further education? Because I know it's national and it's not a Monmouthshire issue, but it's still something that niggles me about looked after children, and it's an ongoing issue. But is there anything in the future sort of work plan that we can think about improving aspiration?
I think, beneath all of this strategy and the numbers, there are real children and young people, and you know them, and we know them very well, and that's the challenge to you as corporate parents, isn't it? And the strategy is clear about the role of counsellors as corporate parents, and all of us across the authority, not just in children's social services, in terms of those corporate parenting responsibilities. We particularly, as Jane has said, strengthened within this strategy compared to the previous one, the commitment to care leavers around education, employment and training. And for Councillor Watkins and Councillor Thomas, who were at the corporate parenting panel, you had the presentation from Hannah Jones about the additional capacity that's gone into her team, and the additional work that we're doing to really connect both within the council but out there with the employers and education and training providers. Obviously, in terms of within the education system, we have support in there and monitor through the work of Richard Austin and others, but obviously it's something which we need to keep coming back to and testing ourselves against as we progress this strategy through and particularly measure the impact of.
I am aware that as a governor at King Henry VIII School, that school has just appointed a LAC mentor who is herself originally a looked after child. And I think that's an exciting new development, and I will ask the school to bring a report to us. It initially only a 12-month appointment because it's dependent on funding. But I thought that was a really good example of a school directly trying to address this huge issue that you quite rightly raise. And it will be very interesting for the school to bring us a report about the effectiveness of that, I think. Yeah. There we are then, members. Thank you very much. Are we happy to accept this and to note that comment... Oh, sorry, Councillor Jones? Oh, right. I thought you were carried away with enthusiasm for... Also note that comments made elsewhere at the parenting panel, as Councillor Watkins says, have been taken on board, so congratulations on that. Miss Marchant, Miss Rogers, if I could thank you both. You've sat through the whole afternoon. And members, thank you for coming for an additional meeting on what's been a fairly grotty afternoon. So there we are. Thank you very much indeed. I now close the meeting. Thanks.